Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm reviewing the KTC H24T09P monitor. I've covered the history of KTC before, but they're an OEM monitor manufacturer for large monitor brands, but they have since branched out on their own. Keys to Combat is what the acronym stands for, and they provide very cost-effective monitors across a large range of specs. For this monitor, I'm going to cover these specs first, and then I'll get into what I like and don't like about the monitor before wrapping the video up. The KTC H24T09P is a 24-inch IPS panel monitor with a 1080p resolution and a 165Hz refresh rate with a 1 millisecond motion picture response time or a 5.9 millisecond gray-to-gray response time. This covers 125.5% of the sRGB color gamut with a standard 1000:1 contrast ratio found with IPS panels and a typical brightness of 300 nits. This can do HDR10, but I'm assuming this doesn't have true 10-bit color, and it's most likely 8-bit plus FRC, but the average gamer's eyes won't notice a difference here. Content creators might though, depending on what they do, but this monitor is geared towards gamers more so than content creation. For ports, this has two HDMI 2.0, two DP 1.2, and a headphone jack. For physical adjustments, this can only tilt forwards 5 degrees and back 20 degrees. This can be mounted with a monitor arm though, and has a 100mm by 100mm pattern. Inside of the box, you get the monitor, base, HDMI cable, power cable, screwdriver, user manual, and warranty card. This particular monitor comes with a 3-year warranty also, which is really good compared to the 1 year you typically find with monitors. Now, I'm not going to cover the in-panel menu to the degree I typically do with higher end monitors, but I will showcase what you can find in the menu really quick. The menu button is a single button on the back of the monitor towards the bottom middle, which I do prefer this over the multiple buttons that you can find on other monitors. Pulling up the menu, for the total tabs you have display, color, gaming setup, input, system settings, and user data. For display, we have brightness, contrast, black equalizer, presets, aspect ratio, sharpness, and ultra vivid. The presets here are actually pretty decent. They do all look very distinct, which is nice. For the color tab, you have color temperature, gamma, hue, saturation, and low blue light. So between these two tabs, you do find plenty of adjustments here to tailor this to your liking. For the gaming setup, we have FreeSync / G-Sync. You can turn this on or off. Overdrive, Game Assist, HDR, Dynamic Contrast Ratio, and Motion Picture Response Time. I do think KTC has done a really good job with putting all of these adjustments in this panel menu, where they could have subtracted a lot of these things just because it is 1080p. It's not 2K or 4K, but they didn't do that. So you have a lot of control when it comes to this monitor. For the overdrive here, I won't showcase footage like I typically do, just analyzing what it looks like with the UFO test. What I will say is that overall, this has pretty minimal ghosting. As you do increase from off all the way to high, you do see a subtle reduction in ghosting, but you do also get a little bit of inverse ghosting. And this is going to bring us now to my on-screen response time tester results, when we're going to look at this with it off and then with it at high in terms of the overdrive. I'm also going to showcase really quick just the data that I got from my Spider X, but I have a couple things that I need to cover with those results. So with the first results here, one note is that the device itself was saying that there was a backlight strobing going on. So this is at the 165Hz. So I thought, hey, it's overclocking from 144 to 165. I will showcase the results of 144, but it said the same thing, which is there was still backlight strobing going on. Looking at the overall information here, kind of what I was thinking. So most of the time when you're looking at somebody advertising, hey, we have a 1 millisecond motion picture response time, it's not really 1 millisecond. What they're actually doing is a black frame insertion on this, and you can actually see that with the results here. So average completion time overall is 13.39 milliseconds. So again, not the 1 milliseconds as advertised, the 02550. So the black, white, black transition is 17.6 milliseconds. Best was 3.8, worst was 11.8, just based off of the chart there. So if we're looking at the chart when we're going from white to black, it's interesting in the opposite corners here. You're seeing on one end when it is transitioning over to white, it actually is faster. It's going 6.3 milliseconds. When we're on the other side, it's 11.3. So it is in that transition that we are noticing that it's just not as fast. But again, we're noticing here that this most likely, in terms of how they claim 1 millisecond, is because they're doing that black frame insertion. So when you're going from the white to black, you're seeing a different time, and then you're going from black to white, you're seeing a different time here. If you're looking at RGB overshoot, which would essentially show up as inverse ghosting, we have none that this is detecting. This is at off. So in terms of overdrive, we do not have this at high. Once we shift over to high, which I will showcase as well, we do notice inverse ghosting. The visual response rating, it is taking all of this information and then rating it essentially on a scale out of 100. So biggest thing here, best is 90.5 in terms of its score, worst is 75.1. Where do we see that? We're seeing that in that transition where it is shifting over towards white. Real quick showcase of 144 hertz. It's actually slower when it comes to this in terms of the perceived response time and then the visual response rating. Overall with this, it still was saying, hey, there is that backlight strobing here. I thought maybe again it was being overclocked, but that isn't the case here. So it is actually going to be not quite as fast at 144 hertz when compared to 165 hertz. So do keep that in mind. So this is with the overdrive on high. We do see overall an increase in the speed here. So it is nice to know that yes, as you do adjust overdrive, this thing is actually getting faster. With that, we are noticing the RGB overshoot. So again, you will notice that inverse ghosting. When I ran the UFO test, it is there. It is hard to see. You're gonna have to look for it. So if this was to show up in a game, I don't think anybody would actually visually notice this. So overall, we are seeing that improvement. What is interesting is when we're looking at the 0 to 255, the black to white, if we're on the far left hand side, it's actually slightly slower, but overall across the board for this, we are seeing the increase in speed. So average complete time here is 12.37 milliseconds. Best was 2.9. Worst was the 12.2. So with this, I just like checking to see where is this at in regards to its response time, especially when they're claiming 1 millisecond motion picture response time, because I know it's not 1 millisecond. So here, what does all of this mean? It's okay in terms of its speed. When I run the UFO test, do I see, again, a huge amount of ghosting? No, not really. So for the average casual gamer's eye, you're really not going to notice much across the board when it comes to this. It is decently fast here. It's not going to best an OLED by any degree, but overall for casual, maybe even enthusiasts, I think this will deliver good performance that you're happy with. Shifting over now to the Spider X from Data Color here, we're going to look at what the color gamuts are that it found. So here they were claiming 125.5% of the sRGB color gamut. They didn't distinguish whether or not that was them trying to use 10-bit color or not, but here this is where I'm going to find a limitation in my device. I'm pretty sure this actually just caps out at 100%. So I can at least confirm it's 100%. And then if it's higher than that, I just don't have the device to test it. But this also gives me more data, which is that this is also 81% of the Adobe RGB and then 87% of the DCI P3. So hopefully that's just a little bit more information for everybody. If you need this for a particular color gamut, you can use this information to help you make a more informed purchasing decision. Shifting over now to what I like about this monitor, I'm going to start with the price here because this is very affordable. You can find this typically for $130. Right now it's $110, and then there's another $10 off coupon. So you can actually get this for $100. Now, If you want to get something that has 2K, 240 hertz, like you're gonna pay double, triple the price of this. So for those that they are on a more strict budget, they are comfortable with the size and the resolution, this is a solid pick here because of just how cost effective they've been able to bring this price in at $100. That is very affordable considering the panel type and the refresh rate here. So looking at the price, I judge the monitor based off of that according to the specs that it has. And with this delivers on the performance side. We have minimal ghosting with this nice IPS panel. You do get that full 165 hertz. It provides solid colors across the board. It does have a decent brightness to it. And the presets here, like I mentioned earlier, are actually quite good. One of the other things that I noticed with this is with the size, this being 1080p, I didn't feel like I had a huge loss in resolution. That was one of my initial concerns going back to 1080p, but for the 24 inches here, it does look somewhat comparable to 2K at 32 inches, which is what I usually game on. Now, I've done a bunch of portable monitor reviews. Those are usually anywhere from like 14 inches all the way up to close to 18 inches. And that's one of the things that I've talked about with those portable monitors that are smaller in size, but they only offer 1080p, is that it does look, as you start to shrink down the size of the monitor, if you're keeping that 1080p resolution, it looks more like 2K, and that does feel kind of like that with this monitor. It's not quite as crisp, but the reason for that is the pixel density here. So 1080p at 24 inches, the pixels per inch is like 9192, which is exactly what you would find with 32 inches at 1440p. Now, the larger size to me just adds a level of detail that the 24 inches just isn't quite going to do based off your sitting distance. So if you're really close to it, the 24 inches should be fine. I just like to sit back a little bit further, have a slightly larger size here. The one thing I have noticed, and this will be for both a 32 inch at 2K or this one 1080p at the 24 inches, the clarity of text, it's gonna be a little bit pixelated because of the density there. Now, if we had 24 inches at 2K, that wouldn't be an issue. Here, if you do a lot of text-based work, you will notice that this it looks more pixelated. Now you can run clear type, it will clean that up a little bit, but I just wanted people to be aware of that. So maybe if you play, for instance, a game that is just heavy on the text, you may need to adjust some things for that. But across the board, this thing delivered really good, solid performance. So whether I'm playing a first-person shooter or an RPG, an adventure game, if I'm playing on consoles, visually, this does look very good. And again, very minimal ghosting here, so you don't have to worry about that. Shifting over to the negatives here, I actually don't have any. Because I'm considering this price point, I don't have any just glaring standout negatives that I've been able to find with this monitor, which is awesome. I do have a handful of gray area things, which are things you may or may not care about that I would want you to just be mindful of before you make a final purchasing decision here. And I'm going to start this with the HDR. Again, I mentioned earlier, they're saying, hey, HDR 10, which that should signify 10-bit color, but this is most likely 8-bit plus FRC, not true 10-bit color, just because it costs a lot of money to produce a panel like that. Will you visually notice a difference? No, if you're just a casual gamer. If you deal heavy in programs like Premiere Pro or Photoshop where you do need to have the legit 10-bit color, then yes, that's going to be a problem. But again, this is geared more towards gamers. If you're gaming with this, the downside here is going to be making all the various adjustments to make sure that HDR looks good in a game. It's just a lot to do. So I don't know if many people will ultimately use the HDR with this monitor, and that large amount of adjustments that you would need to make to get this to your liking, that's typically geared towards a PC. Consoles across the board, I've typically found to be better looking when it comes to HDR, just kind of the presets that they use with those consoles and whatever is communicated to the monitor. It's just better. Here is where I noticed it wasn't. So I actually wouldn't use HDR on consoles personally, because the adjustments that you can make with the console, there just aren't as many compared to a PC. PC, you could nail the look down, it would take some time. Consoles, it would be harder to do. I would also say, I've only tested that with a handful of games. You'd probably want to test a bunch of them and see maybe there are a handful of games out there where you would prefer HDR to be on in that instance with the console versus off. And that's going to bring us to the second thing, which is just limitations with consoles. Here you can use HDR, you can do 1080p, you can do 120 Hertz, but you're kind of limited to that. So if you're wanting more options when it comes to consoles, this may not be the right fit for you. Here I also noticed that with the PlayStation 5, no variable refresh rate, but with the Xbox, it did have that. So just something to keep in mind depending on the console that you use. Last here, the base is very small. And with that, my concern would be just placement on your desk, and if the area is prone to shaking at all, because this doesn't have a large base on it. Again, it is smaller. My concern here would be that if something just shakes your desk or TV stand or whatever, pretty good, this may topple over. It doesn't have a huge amount of wobble to it in general, but you're just looking at a smaller base of support with this. The good news is that you can mount this to a monitor arm, and those aren't incredibly expensive. You can find those for a pretty good price point these days compared to years ago where they were very expensive. Last thing I want to point out, I don't consider this a negative, it's just something that is there with IPS panels, is the IPS glow. So in a darker game, this does have a backlight glow to it. Here, my camera is making this look more pronounced than it does in person, but it will still be noticeable. So if you are prone to playing very dark games, keep that in mind. So that is going to wrap this video up. This is a solid monitor as an entry point for PC players specifically, if you're cool with the resolution and you still want an IPS panel with a good refresh rate and a solid response time. If you're needing more options, specifically when it comes to consoles and things like that, you're going to have to double the price. And if you do that, you can get into 2K and things like that. You don't usually find the HDMI 2.1. So you're going to do a little bit of research on that just to make sure that it does kind of check all the boxes for options with consoles that you're wanting to get out of a monitor. But for PC, I think this is an incredible price here. It's just really cool to see that the entry point to get into PC gaming is coming down a lot. And I think that's going to be great for everybody, because it just means more people have the option to use PCs for gaming, where years ago it wasn't like that. The entry point was just so high, it deterred a lot of people from even attempting to do it. Now we're seeing that, hey, it is an easier price point just to enter this arena when it comes to PC gaming. So this monitor gets a huge thumbs up from me, and I think KTC has delivered a solid product with a great price point when it comes to this monitor. I will have a link for this in the description if you want to pick it up. If you have any questions about this, let me know in the comment section. I will make sure to answer that for you there. If you like the video, hit the like button for me as it helps the channel out. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, hit the subscribe button for me. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.